What's up, Packer fans? Welcome to another episode of Titletown Talk. I'm your host, Ian Ewing. Welcome to the show. We are going to talk about every single pick that was made in the 2025 NFL Draft by the Packers on this episode. We'll just kind of talk through, how does each player fit on the team this year and beyond? Was it good value where the person was picked, so on and so forth. In the coming episodes, we'll do a deep dive on each player individually. What I'm probably going to do is just 2 prospects per episode. Next week we'll do Matthew Golden and we'll do Anthony Belton because they're first and second and so on and so forth. So that's sort of the plan, at least as of now. So overall, I thought this draft was really, really fun. I was quite surprised at it. They definitely didn't do what I expected them to do in about 7 different ways. We'll talk about that in a second. But ultimately, they picked 2 of my favorite players in the whole draft, in Matthew Golden and Savion Williams. Receiver is a position that I feel like I can scout pretty well. Again, not like I'm going to ever work in the NFL or even be half as good as other podcasters out there. But, I think when I look at receivers, I get a good sense of what they do well, what they don't do well, so on and so forth. So I watched a lot of the receivers. If you guys remember the receiver episode, we talked about Savion Williams and Matthew Golden at length. So those 2 were picked. That obviously made me really, really happy. But there were some real surprises here in some of the players that they picked. There were players that they picked that were outside their thresholds that we talked about ad nauseum on this podcast. All in all, prediction-wise, we were in the ballpark in round 1. Like I said, Matthew Golden was in the tier 1, and not necessarily tier 1 meaning perfect fit, but tier 1 in terms of, these guys, if they're there, the Packers will probably take them, but they probably won't be there. So we talked about Matthew Golden as an option. He was a top 30 visit for them. He just didn't have a lot of testing, so on and so forth. So we were sort of in the ballpark there. In round 2, we got round 2 and round 3 mixed up. I was positive they were going to draft Anthony Belton, but they took him in the second round instead of the third round. Ultimately, though, every mock draft I did, no matter what board I used, Matthew Golden was picked way before the Packers picked. Then we started to see some, boards where he was falling a little bit. And it really did just seem because, some of the top teams in the draft had other needs that were bigger. Probably the more blue chip players, even though I would argue that Matthew Golden is a blue chip player, they were at other positions. So, anyway, when Matthew Golden made it to 23, I kind of thought his lack of testing would keep him from being drafted. In addition to the fact that he didn't really have a lot of production outside of this first year of college. So again, we talked about it a lot. Production matters at receiver for the Packers. What did they do? They took 2 players in Savion Williams and Matthew Golden who don't really have the level of production that they normally look for. Like I said before, Anthony Belton, he's somebody that I had mocked them in round 3. I was very sure he was my official prediction that they were going to draft him in round 3. Ended up picking him in the second instead of the third, so I'll take a little bit of a win there. I'll take half a win there. John Williams, their 7th round tackle, was in my final board as a prediction, as well as Micah Robinson, the cornerback from Tulane, was there as well. Warren Brinson, the defensive tackle they drafted, he was a tier 1 fit. We talked about him on the Most Likely Packer episodes, but I didn't really put him in the predictions for whatever reason. I kind of thought that I didn't, or thought that I did. I didn't. But he was a tier 1 fit. It's not surprising at all that they took him. So that being said, my first draft making predictions, I'll say that I got 3-ish right. But I got a lot of work to do, and I hope you guys bear with me. You didn't laugh me out of the room when you read my predictions and none of them came true. I still thought I had a lot of fun with it. Let's start with round 1. We're going to do a deep dive in the next few episodes of each player. We're going to go over the scouting report from several different experts and then kind of mix in what I heard. Today, we're just going to do kind of high level. Round 1, they took Matthew Golden. Obviously, we talked about the previous episode. I've talked about him a lot. He was a complete steal. Let's take away the fact that he's my favorite receiver in the draft, favorite player in the draft. One of my favorite receivers that's come out in recent memory, by the way. So I'm very high on him. I will say this. Not only was he my favorite player, I didn't think that there was a chance in hell they were going to take him. Not because they didn't like him, right? Outside of the reasons we just talked about. But the fact that he made it to 23 is a sheer act of fate. There were a few people out there that were a little lower on him than me, mostly just because of the late breakout. But, you can't deny the tools that he has. this year, I would not be shocked if he took over as the go-to guy this season. If we don't see the jump from Wicks that I keep talking about, you guys remember from a previous episode, I told you Dontavian Wicks is going to be their best receiver this year. That was before they drafted Matthew Golden. That being said, I still think there's a world, probably a more likely world, where Wicks is their best receiver this year. But there's also a world where Golden is going to be, the go-to guy this season. That being said, drafting Golden is more for next season and the following seasons, the next 5 years. Dobbs is not going to be back next year. We've talked about it a lot. The only way that I could see Romeo coming back next year is if he has like a breakout season this year. If he establishes himself as a 1,000-yard receiver or something like that, and then let's just say Wicks, on the other hand, he ends up playing poorly, doesn't have a good season. That particular scenario, I could see them, extending Romeo Dobbs. Even at his current production, though, Romeo is going to be getting in that $15 to $20 million a year range. To me, from what he's shown so far, he's not even remotely worth that. So I don't even want to have that conversation right now. Christian Watson probably won't be back unless he, comes back and has this sort of urge to do a prove-it deal with them when he comes back from injury. So that means in 2026, it's going to be Wicks, Reed, Golden, and Savion Williams as your 4 receivers. And then they'll probably, draft somebody again next season. So that's a really strong receiver room. Wicks, Reed, and Golden. Let's just take Savion out of it. That's a great receiver room. And like I said, I still think there's a possibility that Watson will come back in 2026 for, a 1-year deal. You can never have too much speed. You don't have to have only one speed guy, right? That's a strong receiver room. At minimum this season, though, I expect Golden to come in and be the man beater that we've been talking about. When we talked about Devontae Adams coming to the Packers, they needed 2 things at receiver. If you guys remember, go back to the receiver episode. They needed someone who could stretch the field deep, who could make the defense play a little bit more zone, bring that safety back, open up the underneath for, Reed, Tucker Kraft, Musgrave, whoever. The other thing they needed was a bucket getter, and that's what Devontae was going to bring. So again, they need someone who can beat everybody deep, beat man coverage, and be a bucket getter. The reason Golden is such a great fit is because he does all 3 of those things well. You have to respect his speed. And if he can continue to improve his route running, which Goody said this in the press conference after they drafted him, they thought his route running improved from the final game of the season to the combine and the pro day. So if you think about that improvement over the course of 2-3 months, you can tell he's been working out. He actually said to Goody that he wanted to work out in the Packers facility after he was drafted on Thursday night, which is, I love that. The CBA does not allow for that, though, of course. But again, I think bare minimum this season, he can be the guy who takes the top off the defense, right? Best case scenario, he does that, and he becomes the bucket getter on 3rd down that they don't have right now. I could see a world where Golden ends up getting more targets than Dobbs and Wicks. I don't think he's going to get more targets than Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed is probably going to be the best receiver on this roster this year. I think he's going to take a big jump. And you guys know how high I am on Dontavian Wicks. So for me to say Golden could outsnap him, outproduce him, that's how high I feel on Matthew Golden. Round 2, they went with Anthony Belton, the tackle guard from NC State, at pick 54. This was a bit of a surprise, not because of the fact they took him. Like I said, I knew they were going to draft him. I was sold. Not only was he a Senior Bowl guy and did well at the Senior Bowl, they brought him in for a 30 visit. He's huge. He's athletic. Great Raz. They were all over him. I would have been shocked if they didn't draft Anthony Belton. But what I was surprised about is that he was their pick at 54. I thought he was more of a 3rd-round guy. I think a lot of other people also thought he was the 3rd-round guy. Again, I thought he was the 3rd-round guy because of what other people were saying. You guys know I don't know anything about linemen. The crazy thing is he did 18 visits. So obviously the top 30 visits. I haven't clarified this in other episodes, guys. I want to be clear on this. The top 30 visits doesn't mean it's the top 30 players that they want to pick. It just means that they get 30 possible visits from the prospects. Every team gets 30. So he visited 18 teams for top 30 visits. So my thought process is they really, really wanted Anthony Belton, and they were worried that if they didn't take him in the 2nd, they weren't going to get him in the 3rd. And you heard Goody talk about they wanted to trade down. There was no opportunity after day 1 to trade down. So I think they probably wanted to trade back a little bit and pick Belton up maybe in the 60s, right? And then pick up a 4th or a 5th or whatever. But when the pick was announced, I was not happy. My cousin was here. If you're listening, Lave, you know I wasn't happy about that. But it's not because of Belton. It's because of who they passed on. They passed on Landon Jackson, the edge from Arkansas, and Trey Amos, the cornerback from Ole Miss, at 54. The fact that they were both there at 54 was absolutely mind-blowing. So when I saw two players, Landon Jackson, Trey Amos, who I thought they could take at 23, and they took Anthony Belton, obviously I'm like, oh, that's really shitty. That sucks. Sorry, pardon my French. So it was really less about Anthony Belton and more about the fact that they had other players there that I thought maybe met the needs of their team a little bit better. I thought that, Landon Jackson and Trey Amos were literally first-round players. There were other people who also thought that as well. It wasn't just me. So for them to pass on those two at 54 after being two players I would have been fine with at 23. I would have been fine with Landon Jackson at 23. I just wouldn't have been surprised, to be clear. What I learned with them taking Belton, and this is the same thing we learned in free agency, guys. We thought that they were going to, I think there were several others too that thought they were going to pick up an edge rusher in free agency or a defensive tackle because they needed to improve the pass rush. What did they do in free agency? They picked up a corner in Nate Hobbs and they paid big money for Aaron Banks. That same sort of played out in the draft. So it became very clear that despite what Goody said, they were a lot more comfortable with their defensive line and corner than we thought they were. Ultimately, they are higher on those three positions, really, defensive tackle and edge and cornerback, than we are, the fans. And that's become very, very clear. There's always been a chance that this was going to happen. I've mentioned it in other episodes too. Maybe we, the fans, are thinking like, oh my God, they need to get another pass rusher. They need to get a defensive tackle. They need to get a cornerback because they're moving on from Jair or whatever. They've invested a lot of resources in all those spots, right? They maybe not cornerback because they don't really have a lot of money in there, but they definitely invested a lot in the defensive line. Paid Kenny Clark a big extension. Drafted Devontae Wyatt in the first round. Drafted Lucas Van Ness at number 13 overall. Drafted Rashawn Gary at 12 overall. Paid him a huge contract. They were never going to probably spend the capital that we thought they would on that position. That being said, we can get pissed about it all we want that they didn't address pass rush or the cornerback position. I think there's a lot of room for growth in the guys they have, and let's not forget this, okay? I know the way the season ended, we all are salty about the Packers, right? They were a top 5 defense statistically at the end of the season. Remember, we can sit here, we all remember when they lost to the Eagles, they lost to the Bears, they lost to the Vikings, right? We remember that, and it hurts, right? But they were much better than what I've heard people talking about them as. They were an 11-win team that really measured out to be like a 13-win team. If you look at some of the advanced metrics, top 5 offense, top 5 defense. If anybody at the beginning of last season, if we told that person at the beginning of last season, yeah, the Packers are going to be top 5 offense and defense, everybody would have been ecstatic, right? Anyway, that's a side tangent. As far as Belton goes, let's get back to planet Earth here. Sorry, guys, a little tangent. As far as Anthony Belton goes, he can play guard and tackle. They've been very clear that Jordan Morgan's going to be their left tackle of the future. So that means to me that Anthony Belton is going to compete with Sean Ryan at right guard, and he's probably going to take his place in the end after he move on next season, because I don't think they're going to keep Sean Ryan. So that means they have some fantastic offensive line depth. They basically go like 9 deep right now, which they already had a deep offensive line in my opinion. They had 6 real starters. Now they have 8, right? 7, we'll say. I'm high on John Williams because of what I've heard about him. I think he's going to be good, but we'll get to him later. I also could see a world where Sean Ryan moves to center in 26, and then they move on from Elton Jenkins. I could also see where Elton Jenkins plays another 3 seasons at center, and then you have Morgan, Banks, Jenkins, Belton, Tom. That's a fantastic and also massive offensive line. Jordan Morgan, Aaron Banks, and Anthony Belton are massive human beings. Elton Jenkins is no slouch himself. Zach Tom's a big guy, but he's more of an athlete. That is a massive mauling offensive line. So that's exciting to think about. Like it or hate this pick, I've actually grown to really like the Anthony Belton pick. Again, I would have preferred it in the 3rd or maybe a trade back, but it didn't work out that way. And that's okay. There's one thing that the Packers have earned from us, guys. It's that we need to trust them on the offensive line, especially under Goody. I know there have been some picks that Ted Thompson made at the end that didn't pan out. Jason Spriggs comes to mind. Yikes. Even though I was super high on him when they drafted him. We should trust them on this. So until we see otherwise, let's trust them. Round 3, they take Savion Williams, the wide receiver out of TCU. Again, other draft crush of mine. When they took Savion, I was absolutely shocked. And happy, but absolutely shocked. I thought if they were going to take another wide receiver, they would take Jalen Royals, who I also loved, by the way. One thing I learned yesterday about Savion Williams, before I get to that, he's 6'4", 225, and he runs a mid 4.4. That is a freak show athlete, a absolute freak show. 6'5", 225 is Calvin Johnson size, right? Julio Jones size. And he's just as fast as those guys too, and I'll tell you why. I just learned this yesterday. When he ran the 40-yard dash, he was coming off of an injury. That's why he didn't do all of his combine drills, which is also why I didn't think they'd take him because, again, lack of testing. So he didn't do the other drills of the combine. He ended up bowing out of the Senior Bowl as well. If you watch the tape of Savion Williams, just type in the highlights. Savion Williams highlights TCU. He is way faster than a 4.4 in my opinion. If he was healthy, I think he would have been a mid 4.3 guy. If that happened, we can thank our lucky stars for this. If that happened, he would not have been a round 3 pick. He would have been picked early second, maybe late first. Even with his, rawness. His acceleration with the ball in his hands is it's something I've never seen before. There's a play on tape where I think he's at Wildcat quarterback. He sees this seam and he takes it up the middle and he just absolutely dices the defense. There's another one where he catches a deep crosser, takes it across the middle, jumps over a safety, and then takes another 10 yards after that. This dude is a freak show. An absolute diabolical freak show. And I think he is going to be good. I'll get to this at the end here. This is a guy, he played Wildcat quarterback, he played running back, he took jet sweeps. He did basically anything that TCU needed him to do. So we talked about him a little bit in the wide receiver preview show. I fell in love with him, but I didn't think there'd be much of a chance they'd take him because of his lack of testing, but mostly because of his lack of college production. He also hasn't really been asked to block that much. I think he can be good because he's massive, but he hasn't been asked to block. His pick turned out to be a massive red herring, meaning it was right in front of us the whole time. Versatile athlete, tremendous size, can play 3 positions at a high level. Well, from what we've seen, that's a Packer all day long. That's a Green Bay Packer all over. So writing him off like I did was a bad decision. Again, I'm learning, guys. I'm learning. I watched a few games last season, about 3 weeks ago, fell in love with him. So you can imagine I was pretty stoked when they picked him, right? Also surprised. He's very, very raw, especially as a route runner. He's not been asked to run a lot of routes, basically just deep crossers and slants. And then he takes a lot of screens and stuff. And then he has really inconsistent hands. There's a couple catches on tape where man, this dude is a freak. He can catch a lot. He can catch anything, right? And then he has there are literally plays, guys, where he crosses his hands and drops passes. And I think it's just, concentration drops. It's inexperience, right? He's not going to come in this year and play a bunch of snaps. So you can see a world where he kind of, they get to use his athleticism. They use him as a Debo type of guy, right? And then, he can develop a little bit as a wide receiver, right? I think there's a really good chance that he becomes a really good receiver down the road, especially with this coaching staff, right? There's one thing the Packers have proven: they can develop offensive linemen and they can develop wide receivers. Okay, I know that this last season wasn't a great sign of that, but there's a lot of stuff, a lot of reasons for that. This wide receiver room now is the deepest and most talented group in the whole NFL, and I don't think it's even close. Right, I know the Bears, they picked up Luther Burden, which I was really salty about. They have, Roma Dunze, they have DJ Moore. They got a good receiver room. They, obviously the Vikings have a good receiver room. The Lions, not so much. So again, I think that they have a really good chance to have the number 1 offense in the league. You could go 4 wide right now. Whoever it is, right? Whoever they play in the 4 wide set, they're going to be playing against a cornerback. Wide receiver 4 right now is going to play a cornerback on most teams. It's going to be selling insurance in 3 years. So you can imagine, put Dontavian Wicks, let's just say he's your 3rd best receiver on their 3rd best cornerback. Game over, right? So I think that's the plan this year is they're going to pass protect like crazy. They're going to combine a power run game with a spread offense where they're going to throw a lot. It's going to be a lot of fun. So in the third round where they picked Savion, there really wasn't any corners on the board. Noah Williams would have been my pick there. I think they would have picked Noah Williams too, by the way. But the Chiefs jumped up ahead and took him, I was super salty about that. There were really no impactful edge rushers at the time. So anyone who's pissed about them picking Savion is just trying to be mad at this point. There really weren't a lot of better options there at that point. The only person I would have taken over Williams, maybe Jalen Royals, but if you think about it, that kind of became redundant after they picked Golden. They don't really have a receiver like Savion. They don't have anybody like Savion on the team, and there really aren't a lot of players like Savion on the whole planet, right? So super fun pick. Sorry, I went a little bit long on Savion Williams. Round 4, they drafted Barron Sorrell, the edge rusher from Texas. That was a super fun moment too, guys, when he was at the combine, or not the combine, he was at the draft. The Packers didn't even know he was at the draft. I saw Roger Goodell come out for a minute and that he was going to announce the pick. I was like, did they really just pick Shedeur Sanders? Obviously, none of us knew that Barron Sorrell was at the draft, right? That was a really cool moment. He seems like a really, really good kid. I thought that was super, super cool. The Matthew Golden moment on round 1 was fun, but to have that kind of moment in round 4 was really, really cool. Got to be honest, I got to take the L on this one. I didn't even have Sorrell on my radar. The reason being is he didn't test at the combine. He didn't do enough testing to get a RAS score. So when he did his pro day, he put all of his scores together. He ended up with a 9.3 RAS at 6'3", 255. So if I had gone back and looked at the edge rushers again, I would have seen him and I probably would have done some work on him. He's a prototypical Packer, right? Give or take 5 pounds and 1 inch of height. Okay. So again, I hadn't watched Barron Sorrell. I don't know much about him. So I'm going to go off of what I've heard from all the Packer people I listen to and follow. Watched a little bit of highlights of him. It sounds like he was kind of a steal in round 4. They got him right around where he was on the consensus board. Daniel Jeremiah had him at like 120. So taking it 124 was a good spot. He really does everything well. He's really strong. He's a good run defender. He was super productive in college. I know everybody wants to see production. He was productive against really good competition. He went against Kelvin Banks Jr. every day in practice, which is really cool. Kelvin Banks Jr. was picked by the Saints at pick 11, I believe. And by the way, a good pick. Pick 9. Sorry. So he's a really high character guy too. You can hear it when he talks. He just seems like a really good kid, super good guy. All the Texas coaches said he's a great leader. Ultimately, this season, he's probably going to be a 3rd or 4th edge rusher, right, and rotate a little bit. But I do think he could make an impact this season. He's got a pretty high ceiling, at least for a 4th-round pick. He's got a high ceiling, freak athlete. I'm not saying he's going to be an all-pro or anything like that, but his ceiling hasn't really been close to being tapped into yet. I like his chances maybe being a 6 to 8 sack guy in the league, number 3 edge rusher in the end, if not a little bit more. If I had to guess this year, he's probably going to take over Anibari's spot. Andy Herman and Justice Mosqueda were talking on the Pack-A-Day podcast today about this. Andy said that he thinks that Kingsley Anibari could be cut, and I do think it's an interesting conversation. I would keep Brenton Cox over Kingsley Anibari any day. In the small sample size we had last year, Brenton Cox was much better. So if Brenton Cox can defend the run a little bit better, which, again, he has a chance of doing this year coming in, I think Kingsley Anibari could be cut in favor of Barron Sorrell. So that's Barron Sorrell. Round 5 was a massive surprise. Colin Oliver from Oklahoma State. They had him listed as a linebacker at the draft, but it sounds like he's going to play edge for the Packers. To confess, I did zero research on him. Right? And here's why. The Packers have never picked a guy like him in the entire history of the Ron Wolf, Ted Thompson, Goody era, right? I did bring up his name as a possibility at linebacker because he's super athletic. His RAS was like 9 something or other. So I did mention his name in the linebacker preview, but he's not even going to play linebacker that much. He's going to be an edge rusher. At Oklahoma State, 2023, he was an edge rusher. He's what they would call a tweener, right? Somewhere between a defensive end and linebacker. So sort of like Abdul Carter, sort of like the Micah Parsons, like Jalen Walker in this year's draft, right? They play as a speed rusher, right? A situational pass rusher that comes in on passing downs and rushes. In 2024, they converted him to linebacker, but they put him in passing downs. I think the way they used him in 24 is going to be exactly what he does for the Packers. He had a 34% pressure percentage in the 2 games he played. That is psychotic. That is insanely good. I believe he suffered a toe injury, which is why he only played 2 games. But had he not gotten hurt, Mike Renner, again, you guys have been talking about Mike Renner from CBS Sports. He really, really likes Colin Oliver as well, and I really trust that. I love Mike Renner. Had he not gotten hurt, consensus is he would have been picked way higher than he was. On the consensus board, he was, I think, 141, so taking him at 158 was really good value. But again, it was a huge surprise because they don't take edge rushers that are under 260, let alone an edge rusher who's 6'1". So he's 6'1", 245. The reason they don't do that is because if they have to play on running downs, they're a huge liability, right? So 6'1", 245 is very small for them. But here's the catch. He's going to play a role that they've never used before. And Milt Hendrickson and Matt LaFleur, and I think Goody said it as well, they literally called him a DPR, which is a designated pass rusher. So Milt Hendrickson said, with the way the league is now, this is a quote, the quarterbacks are getting the ball out really, really quickly, so you need a guy who can get pressure quickly. So AKA a speed rusher, someone they do not have in any capacity. I've said for a long time, I was really high, outside of the personal stuff, really high on Mike Green. I was not a Nazaraku guy, but I love Mike Green. They were never going to take Mike Green in the first round. They would never take Colin Oliver in the first round either, right? They're only taking a chance on him like this because he's a 5th rounder, right? But I like the philosophy of having different blends of edge rushers. The Packers always have these power rushers guys. They convert speed to power. They're quick, they're athletic, but they don't really win quickly, right? So I've thought for a long time they need to get a guy like Colin Oliver, a change of pace guy, right? On early downs, it sounds like he's going to be playing the Sam linebacker position, which is super cool. So he could be on the field all 4 downs, depending on what the situation is, right? Early downs, throw him in there at Sam instead of Tyron Hopper and Isaiah McDuffie. Send him on a blitz package, do some run blitzing with him. Again, super freak athlete. He's more athletic than Hopper, more athletic than Isaiah McDuffie. And I think he has some real juice that we've not seen before at pass rusher. So this is a fun pick. Sneaky, great pick for them. We might look back at this one in a few years and think this is a steal, right? Or he could totally flame out, right? So I'm going to watch a lot of tape on him before we do the deep dive probably in a few weeks, depending on how many episodes I crank out. But just initially watching the highlights, really, really excited and really, really intrigued. Round 6, they took defensive tackle Warren Brinson out of Georgia. Solid pick for them. I like this one a lot. They got him right where he was on most draft boards. Another guy who's going to come in and rotate at defensive tackle. I think he has a bit of a high ceiling as well, right? He's not quite a TJ Slayton replacement at nose tackle. He's kind of a tweener. He's sort of like a tweener between nose tackle and 3 technique, which is good in my opinion. Versatile. He can play up and down the line. He's kind of a discount version of Derek Harmon. They're actually about the same size, right? Obviously, Derek Harmon was way more productive, right? But in round 6, taking a guy like that, pretty interesting. I'm pretty mad at myself in general for not throwing him in as a possible pick in the day 3 episode I did, or the day 3 post I made on Facebook. I did mention him on the Packer episode, the most likely Packer, but I kind of went away from him and I narrowed the list down. I didn't want to dump a huge list in there because then it's cheating, right? But I narrowed it down in favor of, Cam Horsley, Zeke Biggers, and a few others, but he's still a tier 1 fit. He had a 9.1 RAS, 6'5", 315, so great size. He had a 94th percentile broad jump, which is crazy. The Packers love the broad jump for defensive tackles. And he did 27 reps on the bench press. That's crazy. So I really, really like this pick. I thought they got good value in round 6. He has that Georgia pedigree. The Packers tap into, they get a Georgia player every year, it seems like. Ultimately, I think he will beat out Colby Wooden. Colby Wooden, I liked him when they drafted him. They definitely overdrafted Colby Wooden. Another freak athlete, but again, he was more of like that defensive end in a 3-4 when they ran, Joe Barry's defense. So I do think Colby Wooden is just he's too much of a tweener and he doesn't really have a place as a defensive tackle, but he's too big to play defensive end in the 4-3. So I do think Colby Wooden will not make the team this year unless he comes in looking juiced or something that we didn't expect, right? But I like this Warren Brinson pick quite a bit. He might play a little bit along the line this year. It could be a Kenny Clark rotational player, right? Take Kenny out for a few snaps. If Kenny Clark gets hurt, though, at the current state of this defensive line, my boy Warren Brinson is going to play a lot. So really like that pick a lot. Round 7, pick 237. So they had 2 7th-round picks. They picked Micah Robinson from Tulane, the cornerback. They finally picked a cornerback. This is somebody I predicted they'd draft in the 7th round or maybe UDFA. But this is ironically probably my least favorite pick. He's pretty small. He's only 5'10", 183. That's really small for them. They like people to be at least 190, maybe 5'11", right? But he has great speed. He ran a high 4.3 at the Tulane Pro Day. But here's the weird part with him. His short shuttle was one of the worst of all time. Like 6th percentile short shuttle. So I have to think there's something that happened there. I've just seen a couple highlights from him. I don't want to sit here and say like I've been watching Tulane tape because I haven't. But that's like generationally bad short shuttle. So I wonder if there was maybe some kind of issue. Maybe he like hurt himself, or maybe he's just bad at drills. Like I was bad at drills in high school too, right? Maybe some of you listening remember that. So I'll be honest, I'm a little bit, I don't know very much about him. But Goody said he's an ascending player. He started out in the FBS, it's like D2, I think. I forget how that works. And then he came to Tulane last year, D1, and actually really got better. He can play off-press man, which is a unique type of coverage skill to have. And he's versatile in that aspect. So we'll see what happens this season. Probably going to be a guy who is going to compete with Kalen King at backup corner. Probably whoever becomes better at special teams is going to make the team there. But when we compare him to Kalen King, though, and I like Kalen King, he's a much better athlete. So we'll see what happens when we get to camp. Round 7, 250, they took John Williams, the tackle/guard out of Cincinnati. Probably going to play guard for the Packers. I don't think he's going to be a tackle based on what I've read. This is another player I predicted that would go to the Packers. He's a pre-draft visit. He did the Shrine Bowl as well. I don't think he did the Senior Bowl. Evidently, he did poorly at the Shrine Bowl, LOL. He had the biggest hands, though, of any offensive lineman at the Combine. That's going to be helpful, obviously. You can't coach hand size, right? But he's versatile. Tackle guard versatility. Goody mentioned that he's one of the smartest players that he's ever drafted. Really, really smart guy. He said he's smart enough to learn center, despite that he hasn't played there. So that's intriguing. His RAS was 7.41, so he's not an elite athlete by any stretch. But he's got great size, 6'4", 322. So that's good size. Strength and his strength is pass protection, right? He was one of the better pass protectors in the entire college football last year. So if he moves to guard, I do think that that's going to be a really strong attribute for him. Probably going to be a backup this season, but he can play all 4 spots. That's going to be what keeps him on the team, is his versatility. I think he's probably a bit more of a natural guard than Travis Glover, who is going to probably be competing with John Williams at that final offensive line spot. So that's all the drafted players. As far as UDFAs go, there were a few significant ones. It's significant in general for the UDFAs because every year for like 10 years in a row or something, there's a UDFA that's made the team. So I think it's important to look at the UDFAs as much as we can, because I think statistically one of these guys is going to make it. And there were a couple I really liked. One of them was Amar Johnson, the running back from South Dakota State. So he's a D3 guy. Interesting player for sure. I don't just kind of initially just watching the highlights. He wasn't even on Dane Brugler's board. I think he was like the 50th running back or something like that. He was not on the consensus board. But remember, being from a small school, it's hard to get the credibility you need, especially at running back. But interesting profile. 5'10", 210, so good size. Ran a 4.39 at the Combine. So he might be an interesting guy to watch in camp. I think, the Packers do lack that sort of speed scat back, right? I think Marshawn Lloyd can be that too. Obviously, you guys know I'm super high on that, but Amar Johnson's an interesting guy. My favorite one, though, probably the most likely to make the team as well, is Georgia defensive tackle Nazir Stackhouse. So he has a really good chance to make the team. He was thought of as kind of as high as a 4th-round pick by some people. Dane Brugler had him as like a 5th, 6th-rounder. He's 327, 6'5". He's going to be the most likely guy that takes TJ Slayton's spot at nose tackle. And I think he's a better prospect than TJ was when he came out. So I think he's going to back up Kenny Clark at nose. He's definitely going to be one to watch for sure. I think he has a really good chance to make the team, even in favor of maybe one of those linebackers. So Tyler Cooper is a guard from Minnesota. I think he played a little bit of tackle too. He was up to 202 on PFF's board. So definitely draftable according to them. Probably will compete with Donovan Jennings, the UDFA phenom from last season. I mentioned him a few times. This guy's interesting. Kazir Brown. They call him Bugs Brown. He's a cornerback from Florida Atlantic, so super small school. But get this one. 6'1", 223 for a corner. That's crazy. And he ran a 4.52. So really, really interesting there. Interesting profile. Last guy, Jamon Dumas Johnson from Kentucky is a linebacker, off-ball linebacker. Another guy who was projected in like that 6th, 7th round range. Super athletic linebacker. I do believe I mentioned him on our linebacker episode as, a late round flyer guy. I could see him potentially making the team as a backup linebacker, special teamer type. Again, for a guy like him, special teams is what's going to get him on the roster. As far as the grade, what would I give this grade as a draft? Obviously, not a big fan of draft grades in general because we don't even know what they're going to do in the league yet, but I would say B+. What kept it from being an A for me is just that the fact they didn't really draft a corner early enough. And, it does sound Tom Silverstein from the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel today did report that Jair will not be back. Most likely it's like 99% sure. I still think there's probably like a small chance that he will be back. I just have a feeling. I feel like they're playing a little bit of hardball with him. But again, I would have given this an A if they addressed corner earlier. I think if they had taken one of the corners I liked, Isis Waxter, he was a guy I really liked. You guys know I love Bilal Kone. There was another guy, Jordan Hancock, I really liked. Jason Marshall Jr. If they had gone that route in the 5th or 6th round, not that I don't like the guys that they got, because I do, that would have probably swayed the draft a bit. My favorite picks were Golden and Williams, obviously Golden and Savion Williams. Love Baron Sorrell, and I really like Colin Oliver. My least favorite I mentioned was Micah Robinson, the 7th round corner. Who's going to make the biggest impact this season out of all those guys? Obviously, I think it's going to be Golden, but I do think an honorable mention would be Baron Sorrell. I think there's a real world where he contributes a lot this season, and I would compare it to what Kingsley Enagbare did in 22, his rookie year. I think he had a 16% pressure percentage that year, had 4 or 5 sacks. I think he can actually exceed that this year, what Enagbare did his rookie year. Anthony Belton's going to compete at right guard. I could see him giving Sean Ryan a run this year and playing a little bit. Maybe it turns into a rotation similar to what Sean Ryan did with Jordan Morgan last year and what he did with John Runyon Jr. As far as who has the highest ceiling, last thing, Savion Williams, bare ass minimum. He's going to be a fun gadget guy for his whole career. Best case scenario, he can be a superstar. There are few athletes better than him, or few athletes like him in the entire planet. People at 6'4", 225 who can run like that. If he can just become even an average route runner and improve his hands, I think he can be super, super good. So that's going to do it for this episode. Hope you guys enjoyed this one. Hope you guys enjoyed the draft. I thought it was a really, really fun time. I thought they killed it in Green Bay. I really wish I got to go. Maybe some of you listening did get to go. Hope you had a fun time if you did. Like I said, in the coming episodes, we'll probably do a few just kind of like maybe some comparisons to the other draft classes in the division. Some of the players that were drafted in the division I really liked. Some I did not. For example, the Bears took a guy who was not even on the consensus board in round 4. Oh, the Bears. But we'll have our player previews and scouting reports for all the players they drafted as well as the UDFAs. So I'm looking forward to doing that. I appreciate you guys listening. I'd love to hear what you guys thought of the draft. If you want to leave a comment on the video or the Facebook post or on the podcast or send me a DM, whatever you want. I really appreciate you guys listening. And I hope you guys have a great week. Go Pack, go.